Thanksgiving, the leaves were gold, the streets were quiet, and my phone buzzed with a single message. It was from my mother. "This year will just be the core family, Margot. You understand, right?" Core family, that's what she called it. And just like that, I realized I wasn't included. No fight, no argument, no reason, just silence, wrapped in a polite sentence. I stared at the message like it was written in another language. Then I read it again and again. The last time I spent a holiday with them, my sister was still alive. And now, I wasn't even on the guest list. They didn't know the hours I spent on spreadsheets when the family business was about to collapse. They didn't know I liquidated my savings. Didn't know the lawyer who helped me funnel it through Nana's trust. They only knew I was the quiet one. The one who worked remote. The one who did join dinners, or show up or smile enough. And yet, I held the spine of that company in my hands. I kept them afloat, without applause, without thanks, without even a chair at the table. I should have been angry. But I was. I just got up, made myself tea, and opened the envelope that had been sitting on my kitchen counter. It was the annual shareholder letter, addressed incorrectly. "Miss Margot Hale," one T no R inside. A revised invite to the board meeting. My title had been changed, from voting member to observing shareholder. I laughed, not a bitter laugh, not even a loud one, just a soft, tired exhale from someone who finally saw the full shape of the room she'd always stood outside of. They erased me, but they forgot one thing. I was the one who held the pen 5 years ago, and I kept a copy of everything. I closed the envelope, took a bite of pumpkin pie, store-bought, not homemade, and pulled up the legal freeze template I'd saved for emergencies. Let's see how they handle Thanksgiving when the gravy train stops mid-pour. They always said Hale Heritage Goods was Dad's legacy. Sourdough starters passed down like scripture, packaging inspired by Grandma's handwritten labels, every jar a testament to family. Except it almost collapsed. What they never said, what they never even asked, was how the company survived the crash. When supply chains froze and the bank threatened foreclosure, I stepped in, quietly, legally, through Nana's trust. She had left me a clause, a quiet clause, one that gave me power if I chose to use it. So I did. I purchased 26% of the company, enough to block decisions, enough to redirect funding, enough to stop the bleeding. But I stayed invisible. Because back then, visibility would have shattered what little peace we had after my sister died. She was the light, the connector, the one who could talk my dad down and make my mother laugh. When she passed, I stayed behind the curtain, paid the taxes, filed the audits, kept my name off family press releases. Even when the profits bounced back, I never said a word. Until now. Now they adjusted my title. They called me a passive shareholder. They dared reduce me to a courtesy name on the margin of the invitation. That's when I remembered something Nana once told me. Quiet power is still power, but one day you might need them to hear it. So I opened the freeze file, drafted the motion, flagged the distribution channels, and submitted a formal request to halt all dividend dispersals until the shareholder register was corrected. No threats, no theatrics, just a firm, simple clause in black and white. Margot Hale retains full voting rights and proportional profit share per original trust acquisition. Any amendment without consent constitutes breach. I sent it, one click. And just like that, Thanksgiving went from warm leftovers to a sudden financial frost. No one noticed it at first. Payroll ran late. The warehouse called twice about a missing wire. Then the supplier in Milwaukee refused to ship the cranberry preserves, said the last invoice bounced. My uncle, who somehow became interim operations director, posted in the family group chat, "Any of you know what's happening with accounts payable? We're flagged." Silence. Then came the second message. "Employee bonuses are locked. This can't be real." It was real, because I made it real. The freeze wasn't revenge, it was clarity. A financial mirror held up to people who only recognized reflection when it cost them. I didn't call anyone, didn't reply to the emails that started piling in, didn't answer when the company accountant left a voicemail labeled urgent. I just sat by the window watching snow dust the streetlights, laptop open, phone silent, and then came the first call from my father. I didn't answer. Then my mother, text after text. Margot, are you okay? We didn't mean to upset you. Can we talk? Too late. They didn't want to talk. They wanted a fix. It's funny how fast people go from ignoring you to needing you, the second their world gets cold. That night I baked an apple galette, recipe from my sister's old notebook. The crust collapsed a little, but the smell filled my apartment with something soft, something warm, something honest. I wrapped a slice, set it on the counter, and opened a card that had come in the mail that morning. It was from a colleague, a simple Thanksgiving note. To the most reliable person we know. Happy Thanksgiving, Miss Hale. I smiled, not because it felt good, but because for the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a placeholder, not as the one who stayed quiet, but as the one who kept things standing, even when they tried to erase me from the table. By the end of the week, the panic began to leak. My cousin Ava, who never said a kind word unless it came with a backhanded compliment, sent me an email titled, "Quick chat." Inside was a single line. "We're all a little confused. Could you clarify what's going on?" Confused. That's what they called it now. I didn't reply. Then came a voicemail from my mother, voice tight and sugar-coated. "Sweetheart, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Nobody meant to exclude you. You know how chaotic things get during the holidays." Yes, chaotic. Like when they left me off the group vacation. Or forgot my birthday dinner. Or posted family photos with captions like, "All together again." All except me. And now the non-voting shareholder had pulled the emergency brake. My father didn't leave a voicemail. He just called. Again and again. 10 missed calls, then 14. When I didn't answer, he sent one message. "We need to talk. This is affecting people's livelihoods." I stared at that word. Livelihoods. As if mine hadn't been reduced to an afterthought for years. As if I hadn't covered theirs in silence while being written out of everything that mattered. Meanwhile, at the Thanksgiving table, I wasn't there. But my name was. A friend of my late sister, Celeste, had been invited. She looked around the table, half-full wine glass in hand, and asked casually, "Is Margot not coming this year? She's the reason the company's still alive, right?" The room, I'm told, went quiet. Knives paused halfway through turkey. Someone coughed. Nobody answered. Later that night, the family's financial advisor called my father. He didn't mince words. "If you don't resolve this with Margot, the company's quarterly assets could be frozen well into next year. You'll breach vendor contracts. You might even default." Silence on the other end. Then, how much control does she have? The advisor's voice stayed flat. "Enough." They set the table without me. The long oak one passed down from my great-grandmother. Polished, perfect, picture-worthy, candles flickered, wine breathed. The turkey sat golden and proud at the center, as if betrayal didn't live in the linens. They toasted to legacy, to resilience, to family. And not one person said my name, until Celeste did. She wasn't family, but she was close enough. My sister's best friend. The kind who remembered birthdays and funerals. The kind who noticed absences. Between bites of stuffing, she looked up and asked, "Where's Margot?" Silence. The kind that swallows a room whole. Celeste took a sip of her wine, then added, softly but with edge, "I mean, she's the reason you all still have a company, isn't she?" My mother's smile cracked for a moment. My father cleared his throat. Ava dropped her fork. Someone tried to laugh it off. "Oh, she's just busy. She works remote now, you know, Margot." But Celeste didn't let it go. "I remember the panic in your dad's voice when the business nearly folded. I also remember Margot not leaving her apartment for weeks. I figured you'd have her at the head of the table this year." Nobody answered, because no one could. Because for the first time in a long time, someone external saw through the curated image and spoke the truth they'd all refused to name. Meanwhile, across town, I was lighting a candle in my apartment. No turkey, no centerpiece, just silence, and the warm, slow burn of freedom. I set down my wine, opened my laptop, and checked the board's group portal. Dozens of messages, frozen budgets, vendor complaints, legal alerts. A red flag blinking at the top. Urgent, stakeholder dispute, Hale Heritage Goods. And right beneath it, a note forwarded from the family attorney. Short, precise. If Ms. Hale's conditions are not met, all profit distributions will remain suspended until legal resolution. I closed the tab. No reply. No need. They wanted me out of the picture, so I let them feel what the picture looked like. Without the person who'd been holding the frame, they showed up unannounced. First the knock, then the pause, then another knock, this time sharper. Like they were owed something. I opened the door. My father looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I just stopped shrinking myself to match him. My mother stood behind him, clutching a tin of cookies. The same brand she used to say was too processed. "Margot," she said, "we just want to talk." I didn't say yes, but I didn't shut the door either. They stepped in. For a moment, it was like a scene from a play. Them on one side of the room, me on the other. A couch, a rug, and 5 years of silence between us. My father went first. "You can't do this to the company. It's not just about us. People rely on that income." I tilted my head. "Do you mean the people, or your image of being in control of them?" He didn't answer, so I continued. "I've spent 5 years letting you believe I was the helper, the outsider, the one who should be grateful. But I was the one signing the checks, covering your gaps, holding your reputation together like duct tape." My mother sat down, quiet now. She placed the cookie tin gently on the coffee table. Her hands trembled. "You've always been strong," she said, voice cracking. "We thought maybe you didn't need as much." I looked at her. "That's the thing, I didn't need more, I just wanted truth. But instead, you gave me omission. You gave me silence. And this Thanksgiving, you gave me absence." Her eyes welled. "I brought those cookies you liked, the hazelnut ones." I looked at the tin, didn't open it. Instead, I said, "I forgive you, but I won't undo what I've done. You don't get to ask for my silence again and call it peace." My father's jaw clenched. He looked away and for once didn't argue. My mother stood. She touched my arm lightly. "If we want you back, what do we have to do?" I met her gaze. "Start with the truth. In the next shareholder report, list me as what I've always been. Stakeholder and co-founder by legal acquisition." I walked them to the door, didn't hug, didn't cry. Just watched as they stepped back into the cold. The cookie tin stayed on the table, untouched, because this time, I didn't need sweet things to swallow bitter history. 3 months later, the company's annual report came out. My name was there. Not at the bottom, not in fine print. At the top, Margot Hale's strategic co-founder and major stakeholder. Not daughter of. Not quiet contributor. No asterisk, no apologies, just fact. I didn't go to the family's Lunar New Year dinner. Didn't reply to Ava's text with a photo of the dumplings. Didn't send back a heart emoji. Instead, that night, I stood on stage. At the Young Leaders of Illinois Summit. Next to women and men who had clawed their way to power. Through grit, not inheritance, the moderator asked me, "What's your biggest leadership lesson so far?" I smiled, not out of pride, but out of relief. Then I spoke. "I used to think family loyalty meant silence. That keeping things together meant keeping myself invisible. But survival without recognition is not legacy, and legacy should never cost you your name." I looked across the room. Somewhere I hoped someone needed to hear that. Then I ended with this. I didn't rebuild my family, I rebuilt my value, and anyone who sees that will always have a seat at my table. The applause wasn't loud. But it was enough. Enough to drown out years of being uninvited. Enough to mark the end. And the beginning. I didn't rebuild my family. I rebuilt my value. And anyone who sees that will always have a seat at my table. Subscribe for more stories where silence speaks louder than screams.